Then I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Helen Mayberg, who really needs no introduction. I think pretty much everyone here is familiar with her pioneering work in neuromodulation for psychiatric disorders. I'm sure many of you were around in 2005 when her seminal paper in Neuron was published and really transformed not just the neuromodulation industry, but transformed the hope for many people suffering from treatment-resistant depression. So Helen has been there, in a number of venues, from Toronto to Emory, and now here in New York City, where she directs the Circuit Therapeutics Center at Mount Sinai. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Helen to come up.
It's nice to be with everyone. That introduction just makes me old, but it does mean I'm still here because the problem isn't solved. And I think that's what I'd like to kind of talk with you about. And maybe it's a group therapy session. Maybe it's my group therapy session. But I think that is kind of a theme, and we'll try to definitely want to try to leave time because it's not a lecture, even though it's the only thing I kind of really know how to do is talk at data, because no one's really interested in my general opinion on the world, even though you can't have a general opinion on the world unless there's data. So let's go ahead and put up the first slide. I can kind of do it without slides, but it's just easier. I miss my calling in stand-up, or at least I like to think so. I'm going to use our experience over 20 years. And this is just, I wasn't making a joke. It was May 24th, 2003, that we implanted our first patient in Toronto, patient 0. And there are still patients in that group 20 years later. Patient 0 died about 7 years in, unknown causes, but she had been in remission. And there are still patients that remain in remission that many people have read about, including the woman written up in a fabulous piece in the New York Times Magazine back in 2006. So again, the reason I'm standing here is this hasn't gone away. And the challenge is how come I'm standing here with a bunch of people in neurotech as to why aren't we done? Or why am I not getting to celebrate and that I get to do something else because this is available to people and not just when they hunt me down in an email or a text or to my team, or I have to have a grant to actually take care of them. 20 years ago, we did file a patent that was approved, and it was licensed to ANS, who became St. Jude Medical, who became Abbott. Be careful when you're a scientist about having anybody license IP. Just gets in the way of progress, even though at the end of the day, it's actually what we need to make progress. I'm going to be talking about my team mostly, but again, I've had 3 teams, and I just want to call attention to the fact that the real progress is made. You must have line 1, because if you don't have competent psychiatrists to manage patients who are ECT resistant, not a couple of drugs, but ECT resistant, which means that despite what we're going to talk about available treatments, who knows how to manage and manage patients in an experimental trial with something in your brain, Herculean clinicians. And you are responsible for those patients indefinitely, okay, unless you explant them. But it's mostly about engineers and data scientists now, and that's the team. So like I started to say, is that you can really reduce down depression to a disorder of emotion, thought, and action. And basically, when you have so much psychic pain that you can't move, that is the definition of treatment resistance, because any kind of negative event, even pain in your body, what do? You try to move away from it. Imagine a state of your brain where, in fact, you know exactly what you want to do, but your body and your mind won't cooperate. And you are stuck in that purgatory without change. And if you have change, you transiently exit it and you come back. So as a neurologist, I don't like the Descriptions are great. Metaphors are fantastic. But how do you reduce down the core features? And more importantly, I think for this audience is, what's our definition? If you make an intervention, how would you know it was good enough, really? Not what the FDA says, not what you decide in your trial, but what would it mean meaningfully to allow somebody to open up your brain, shove a cattle prod into it, turn it on with a battery pack that you wear indefinitely? Who in their right mind would do that? And what would it take to actually have that be palatable? And I see Jacob's here, so that, an argument of, well, people just don't want to have that. Yes, they do. If that's an option that does the following: don't have pain, can move, but most importantly, I don't relapse. Because the issue of a relapse is what we're talking about. Getting transiently out of an episode is great. Staying out of an episode is why you allow someone to put a device in your brain and actually keep it there. Because if you have a brain that works, you can do whatever you want. I don't really care what you do, as long as it's your own free will. And I don't have to worry about you relapsing and coming back for a treatment you may not be able to afford or may not have access to. So I think that, we have to accept in this whole interplay that there are all kinds of stakeholders, and everybody's got a bias, and everybody will claim that what I have will work and you just haven't tried it yet. And I would contend, because I don't have actually skin in the game. My interest in all of this started because I was interested in the neurology of depression. It has become kind of a way that DBS and other treatments has been an avenue to understand the neurology of depression. But what I've learned is that there's a lot of belief systems. And those belief systems basically say, my way can do everything. And the bottom line is, all ways can do something. And the question is, what is the order? And I know when James had asked me to speak, it was kind of like, why is pharma not there? I don't know why pharma isn't there, because pharma is hard too. It's all hard. But I think the issue is, what I've learned over 20 years is the combination of treatments is what's important. The problem is we do it in a funny order because we don't have a biomarker of what we're treating. So I want to make this slide very clear because it addresses several things. And again, this is, unfortunately, I can take a very nihilistic point of view or a very optimistic point of view. The problem is, once you've had 4 or 5 episodes, the likelihood that even if I can get you well, take your pick, ECT is usually what is required. The likelihood that you will be well a year from now is under 20%. And the numbers on ECT, the best treatment we've got for this kind of severe depression is you're going to relapse in 3-4 months. But if you can get through where you are right now, not eating, not sleeping, pervasive suicidality in a hospital, you'll take it, but it's no way to live. And I think that this notion of what have we done to help this population in the last 20 years, actually not a lot. What we have done is we have VNS, which in fact, now almost 20 years later, is undergoing after another clinical trial with another 1,000 people because it got approval without meeting its own grade. But that long term, if you get better, you stay better. And now people are entering into a trial randomized to a year of placebo to get access. Okay. And there's something magical about VNS for depression, but it doesn't work in everyone. And what you see is at about 6 months, it clicks in. So be thinking about, what is VNS doing in the brain? Your brainstem doesn't like anybody messing with it, particularly not through your major autonomic nervous system regulator, but you can trick it. And VNS looks like it does something in animal models that is inducing synaptic plasticity. And it takes a while because you're going in from far away. But there's something profound about that hopefully they'll be able to figure out, but probably not in that trial. And hopefully that will succeed, because that is one of the few treatments that has sustainability. It just takes forever. Okay. We have our TMS that got approved in 2008. Very, very successful. It works best on people that have a single drug failure. Although in order to get access, you have to actually fail 3 drugs. So it doesn't even follow its own science in terms of access. We have ketamine approved in 2019 with intranasal ketamine. Again, fast-tracked, breakthrough designation, not basically tested in people who are ECT failures. Infusions of ketamine was well known, and I'll look at that next. What came on the market with a big hurrah in September 2022 was theta burst TMS given with a gazillion pulses 5 times a day for 5 days. You're basically in a clinic all day long getting a month's worth of TMS in 5 days. Dramatic results, 85 to 90% better in 5 days. Clinical trial in a small group showed it was better than placebo. And as I'll show you in a slide, but it doesn't last. Okay, so again, take home message, and because I want to respect the time, is that we don't have treatments. The big thing is we do have treatments. They get people better. They don't keep them well. So I was going to, and I'm not going to do it now, but the idea of biotypes, what I really do for a living, although DBS now takes up all my time, is I was developing biotypes with imaging so that actually you could get people the treatment that matched their brain. And it works, and nobody cares, because nobody wants to do a scan on someone to decide how to treat them. And why not? Because, gee, I think I'll do a 5-vessel bypass on you, but I won't take a picture of your heart. Oh, I think I'll give you some toxic chemotherapy, but I'll do no marker of your cancer. But somehow in psychiatry, the idea of doing a scan to know what's wrong with you is somehow extra credit, don't need it. Don't get me started, including the NIH. Okay, NIH funded 2 trials, including a prospective study of our PET marker of the insula. If your insula is high, you need drug. Therapy won't work. If your insula has low activity, you need therapy, drug won't work. And if you're matched to the treatment you need, you have a 90% response rate to classical treatment. And we tested it prospectively, and we set it up like a cancer trial. Do you beat flipping a coin? And you do. We can do it with fMRI, a different circuit, including the insula. One state therapy works, the other state drug works. And actually, people that fail both kind of share the drug type. We've even got a paper now in review that people who are well in that trial, where actually the biomarker predicted how they would do, we actually know people who will relapse in 2 years. And we have the marker with fMRI that basically can predict that you will relapse in the next 2 years. This is a change of your brain on a treatment that gets you well, which means that adaptation to the treatment may actually set into motion something that is not good for you. And if we don't understand that, we are in serious trouble, because we are only left to pick up the pieces when people fail again. And that's okay, because if we have ways to do that, that each time there's an abnormality or there's a failed treatment, the idea it's a net sum zero is probably wrong. So I think this concept of rapid acting antidepressants, I mean, ketamine infusions works. It can be in the group of people that it works for. You wake up the next day and you feel very good, but you will relapse generally within a week or 2. That led to the idea of people off label. We're bringing people in for infusions, and you learn someone's off time and you anticipate it and you give another infusion, and you can keep people better if they get that rhythm. But if they miss their infusion, they'll get sick. And there's certainly evidence that people stop responding. What did Janssen do with the S-ketamine trial, with the nasal inhaler that was done? they recognized that you needed repeated dosing. They needed to balance not having an abusable drug out in the market. So you need to come in for a nasal inhaler, which quite frankly, what a pain. Everyone's happy to pay for the drug. They're not happy to pay for the psychiatrist to give it. We've got the OxyContin problem in the making if we don't actually keep the drug within the purview of the doctors who give it. But again, just my opinion. I hope I'm wrong. But again, it's about access and who should get it. But if you follow the data, people in the placebo esketamine actually did pretty well, but active ketamine beat esketamine beat placebo. That actually they realized you needed to give it twice a week. And once they came up with the dose and the dosing schedule, you get people better, you keep them better. They had an inspired design. And this is a design that I would love for the invasive to adopt, because in fact, they said, look, you have to come up all your drugs. We're not going to try to beat your brain on whatever mixture of drugs you're on. Come up all your medication, but you will need to be on a single serotonin reuptake inhibitor of your choice that you haven't been on before. So everybody's on a med, and then they get given ketamine or placebo. And then their design was, if you're well with the first phase at the end of a month, then you randomize to active or sham. Do you maintain better if you get repeated ketamine over time rather than inactive ketamine? And again, it works. The issue then becomes inspired because it recognized that this was an adjunct to a medication. Might not be, but they've committed to that. And that was a good safety plan. It eliminated noise that we have not done in device trials. I do want to call your attention because this is approved. It had a breakthrough designation, no ECT failures, and actually 30% of people relapse. So again, not everybody gets better. If you do get better, maintaining it is really good for you. But that again, we have a group of people that is not insignificant that for which this doesn't work. And the same with accelerated TMS. I don't want to beat it to death. It's amazing. On the other hand, it's tricks with statistics. And in fact, if you get better at any point in 5 days when this thing is being given to you every day, that counts as a win in a 90% response rate. It sounds like cheating to me. But that's just my opinion, since that's not a bar I get to practice. On the other hand, it looks as though if you get better on the accelerated TMS and you relapse, there was in the supplement, there was this table that basically showed that you could rescue many people and that you were seeing relapses anywhere from the end of a month to 13 weeks. Some people did go out 6 months. So it works. Again, I'm focusing on the idea nobody gets 100% market share. I like to think that we identify who gets what market share and when, again, not being a business person, but just trying to fit in here, is that everybody should be able to maybe try something once. That's if it's free. And what ends up happening is people don't have access. Now, what we did as my own personal flashback, because this is not a Schulten front for me. I want patients well. There's nothing worse than people calling you and you can't take care of them. I don't want to feel other people's pain. It's not my job. Okay. I'm a scientist playing for a living, doing these experiments. I have to be an adult I'm making a joke, obviously, but it's a responsibility that I've had to assume over 20 years that I didn't have 20 years ago when I just did scans for a living. And I hope that we could get some patterns. And that's, neurology used to be about making diagnoses and we didn't treat anybody. And in my lifetime, neurology does as much treatment as anybody else, but that's not how I trained. So the issue is 20 years ago, we said from our scanning, it was a hypothesis-driven target in the brain. And it basically said, look, you need to drive down area 25 to get better. It doesn't matter if it's drug or therapy or placebo. Doesn't matter what treatment, it's ECT or TMS or VNS. If you downregulated area 25, you seem to get better. And if you didn't get better. So why don't we modulate the system there in people that these other treatments don't work? And as everybody knows, it did work. 4 out of the 6 first patients. We validated our own hypothesis with scans that showed that we downregulated that area and everything that was connected to. And that really set into motion what I've been doing for the last 20 years and what other companies have tried to do, because at that time, pre-ketamine, pre-TMS, pre-VNS, that was pretty remarkable in people that actually weren't left out of the study because they, weren't naive to TMS or ECT, as in these other studies. We actually were only allowed to do people that had failed everything, including ECT. So we actually stacked the cards to the people who had failed everything, and those are the people that got better. That's something you have to pay attention to. And we paid attention to, other people paid attention to, and that's where we ran into trouble. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And I realized in venture and in biotech that you make an investment up front, you're willing to basically lose, but once you lose, you bail. Okay, mistake. I wish science was that friggin' smart. We are not. So if you look at the literature, Medtronic did the ventral capsule. They bailed at 30 patients when active didn't breach sham. Broaden, St. Jude Medical did what we were doing. I take no responsibility. They didn't follow my advice. I gave it and they didn't listen. Needed tractography, didn't listen because we didn't know exactly how to do it. And everyone should get therapy with and without active stim. Nobody wanted to own basically rehab in people, okay, with the magical thought that a device will get you well. And even the great medial forebrain bundle study in Germany that was going to be the great, rescuer of all of us people not making progress. They failed to because just putting the device in, they got a big placebo effect, and they jumped the gun on how long their trial should be. And so a lot of the work in science and at the Brain Initiative is add complexity. Add complexity. And the problem with complexity is it's cool science, but actually if we're trying to get things to market eventually, it has to generalize, it has to scale, it has to be time effective, it has to be cost effective. And no scientist wants to think about that up front while you're trying to figure out how the brain works. But in fact, if you're not thinking about it now, you'll have to be thinking about it later. And maybe someone else will be able to reduce down what you did with 20 engineers to something that your average neurosurgeon and psychiatrist can do, and it's cost effective to everybody. People are now studying putting in 4 electrodes. We don't know which target, so maybe we'll do both of them and we'll figure out what's best. And I think what's important about not walking away too soon is the fact that once you have an implant, unlike when you have a non-invasive technique, if it doesn't work, unless you take it out, you can actually see the natural history of what you did. And when it turns out the natural history is in all the targets that have been tested for DBS, even if you don't get better with the FDA-defined trial time, if you get better, you stay better. It's true in the nucleus accumbens. It's true in the medial forebrain bundle. It's true in the SEC. It's true with vagus nerve stimulation. Doesn't get at who gets what, which is better. Lots and lots of details. But if you get better, you stay better. And you never could have known that if you had had a non-invasive device, because you would have no reason to go back. Whereas if you are implanted, the activation energy to take them out, you keep it in because patients tell you, I'm getting benefit. And the numbers say, no, you're not. Patient knows. That logic and the fact that scientists all around the world continued to do experiments allowed Abbott to actually collate all of the data on long-term follow-up, not with FDA approval of a formal study, but long-term follow-up of 176 people, some from Emory, some from Toronto, taking all the broadened data in which they had, if anybody had read the paper, which nobody did, that at 2 years, it was a 50% response rate when the 6-month blinded trial failed. And if you look at the numbers, it accumulates and a sustained response. And this is the data. I got the slide from Abbott, and I'm not advocating for them. I'm just showing you the data that actually, if you get better, you stay better. It takes time. And this is the basis for their application last summer. And they received breakthrough designation for DBS, for the SEC DBS target, to try it again. So again, this was dead. This was beyond dead. I was writing grants with grant review, paper review, basically saying with our own data from Emory, totally separate from the trial, why are you bothering? Everybody knows it doesn't work. Hello? Okay, stick with it. How do you de-risk? How do you remain an optimist? How do you de-risk the problem if actually there is something there that's worth salvaging? That's not the model of tech. I get it. But I just want to raise the idea that sometimes the right idea, even done many, many ways. I obviously am an advocate for where I spend all my time. But in fact, that this is true for all of these. And how do we design trials that will work? Now, our strategy is, do you blame the psychiatrists? The psychiatrists are never going to figure it out. The surgeons can have to put an implant in. And like everything, whether it's TMS, no matter what trial it is, location, location, location. And we guessed, except this is a circuit, and you've got to find how to get into the right circuit. And that's what we did. And we can do tractography guidance in real time and actually plan the surgery to hit the confluence of 4 white matter bundles, reliably get an acute effect, and actually that target will reliably get people well. So if we're getting 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, using this method and never changing it, that's de-risked one of the fundamental things that we must do. When we've done this in our own trials, we've gotten people better faster. Our numbers have improved. And actually, we got access to the broadened data and we're able to model that data. And what did it turn out was the source of the broadened patients that never got better in 2 years? Surgeons miss the left cingulate. So again, don't have proof that if you adjusted the location and reimplanted that people would get better. We did that at Emory, that actually people weren't better at 6 months and better at 2 years were because we were using different contacts. But in fact, you can start to see there are ways to learn from what we've done and de-risk. We've also learned that picking a endpoint may be problematic because people get better even when they get better over 6 months at different rates, and they have periods of instability. Depression rating scores, there seems to be an instability point that seems to be about 3 to 4 months, right in the middle of when you might want to make adjustments in a trial and you need rules. And what did we do in our brain initiative? And Nick, who will be on the panel next, runs the program of which we were lucky enough to get a grant. We've built a classifier, not to kind of follow moment to moment mood, but to actually say, if we know we get people well, what did we do? What is the definition of wellness in the brain? I don't care what the patient says. I care what the psychiatrist and the therapist and the family, and the patient, employer cares what the patient says. To develop a treatment, we need a readout that says we're at the finish line. And we've developed a biomarker off of prototype Medtronic devices, 2 of them now putting it into the commercial device, and we have a tracker of wellness. And we can know when people convert from sick to well, and the engineers built a classifier to do that. And hopefully I will hear this week about the paper, but actually it's 90% accurate to know when people switch from sick to well, and that can be a way that you can track if what you're doing is working. We can start to then try to understand with basic science experiments, why do some people take longer than others? turns out their brain is damaged differently. And we've learned that the time to stable well is a function of how abnormal your white matter is and the tractography defined template that we target with our treatment. So again, we're moving toward identifying not just who to target, but to be able to prognosticate how long it will take and use imaging to guide what we do and have a readout off a device that can be simplified and actually convert this to scalable practice. Because what I now need to do is to be able to tell the difference between you're having a bad week or you're having an impending relapse. And I need an alarm to go off, not a moment to moment hit that, oh, I feel better with a little jolt, but I need to know when you're actually getting into trouble. And the patients get that too. So that opens up all kinds of ways. How do we avoid asking patients how they're doing? We want a brain device and we want other ways to measure behavior because patients don't know where they are. We know they look different, but they don't know it yet. And they have to learn the new state of their brain. And we've been playing around like they do in animal models. If you have a room and you can quantify movement, maybe you can actually get a readout of the core symptoms, psychomotor slow, and change in terms of how you move, how you're motivated in new ways. So I'm just going to end that, through science, through perseverance, through not getting too distracted, although I'm obviously can get very distracted because I don't like it when people tell me I'm stupid. People tell me I'm wrong. People tell me I can't do what we're doing when it's in our face and we have people writing and needing help and there isn't access for them. But the thing is, the process is more than a stimulator. Stimulator is first step. We need to get that to work. And now we need rehab. And like anything else, the idea that you would not do rehab and you're going to have a readout and say your device works is madness. So as you think about the next steps, as you think about, no, psychiatric illness is too hard, psychiatric illness is seriously hard. This is why most neurologists don't like behavioral neurology. They stick with stuff they can control. But there's not just a market, there's a need. And when there's need, there becomes a market. But we've got to be smart about it. And I think the last 20 years have told us that, like Einstein said, things should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I'll stop there.
Great. Helen, thank you very much.
I know that we're behind time,
That's
so.
okay. We still have time for a couple of questions. I'm going to give Joe extra time. So in a moment, we'll open up to questions from our Zoom audience. But I have a couple of questions first. Great talk. A couple of takeaways that kind of resonated with me. Number one is staying with it, right? I was actually around at NANS when word of the, I don't want to say trial failure, but the failed futility analysis came out. And the following couple of weeks during JP Morgan in San Francisco, I got a chance to talk to the CEO of St. Jude Medical, Dan Starks, and asked him straight out, hey, what's going to happen with depression? And he expected an answer that was, what CEOs normally do. No, he said, nope, we're leaving. We're not going to do anything in the depression space. And unfortunately, it took a decade or more to get back into it. You mentioned VNS as well. Cyberonics got approval, but the product just languished because they didn't have any reimbursement. And they tried 3 different times with CMS and finally got an opportunity to at least have a trial to get reimbursement. So I think that message is really important for neuromodulation vendors is sticking with it. The other message, don't just stick a device in and expect it to work. It's going to take more than just a device. But that said, engineers like to tinker and they like to make things better. So as a clinician, what would you like to see in the next generation of a DBS device or brain device that isn't there today?
Well, I think that, things need to be not have a connector cable to invade the body in multiple ways. I'm still, and I know Jacob will have some other thoughts in terms of not being in the brain. I think you go where the money is. I think if engineers can design a way, and focus ultrasound might do it, but nobody has done studies on repeated focus ultrasound over time. So that's, we'll wait and see. But how to get rid of some of the hardware, how to miniaturize. It's, women kind of go, well, I'm happy to have this big scar on my chest because I wear it proudly, but not to the Met Gala, unless that's the theme. But sorry, I just live in New York and it's coming up and I don't get invited. But I think miniaturization, I think, how can we do this without an electrode in the brain? How could we change it if inducing plasticity is really how this works? How to do that with dreads, how to do that with nutraceuticals, I think, or electroceuticals. I think once you actually have the system you want to look at, then you can start to see where the evolution that's coming through the Brain Initiative or coming through industry kind of is. I want alarm. I want whatever company is going to be able, I want more companies to have sensing systems so that there isn't just one company that's doing it who also isn't jumping back into the game. So people jumping back into the game, if they do or not, again, not a game, but sorry, I'm going to be less flip, that if there will be another trial, of which I have no idea, but hope so, they don't have the sensing system that I've spent the last 5 years developing. And so they'll have to be informed by that, but they don't have a sensing system. So I think the device companies need to evolve, but we as scientists and engineers need to show that sensing matters. And when clinicians need to actually see that as added value. We're watching in Parkinson's that you can get a beta readout. It's not yet clear that people are using it proportionally to its availability because the two companies don't have a readout and one company does. And there isn't a disproportionate market share, at least what I've read. So I think that I don't know what it's going to take to have people jump into the only viable treatment on the horizon for a brain disorder. OCD is small, Alzheimer's, we will wait and see. I saw they're no longer enrolling patients, so I don't know what's going on with that. If anybody knows.
You're talking about function.
About the function, FNS.
We heard that the data wasn't so great. However, Jeremy and I were at the MedTech conference in Dana Point last week, a couple of weeks ago, and there was a session on devices for Alzheimer's. Cognito Therapeutics just raised $73 million for an entrainment system. Another company.
So, I think you asked what I want as a clinician. I need things in this space in psychiatry. When patients fail, they blame themselves. It's very different than in other disorders. The illness themselves makes them feel as though it's their fault. And as things fail, then they actually stop even seeking things out. And you're actually fighting against a different part of their brain. So I think, depression affects many people, even if you take 1% of the 10% of treatment resistance and you leave, the 10% of treatment resistance, however you want to define it, to ketamine and TMS and whatever new thing that will be. But there is a large market of people who are not served and who are disabled and who kill themselves. And I think that ought to be a call to action. And I think there's been de-risking of things. And if you just take a business point of view, there are not going to be 3 DBS companies if somebody doesn't come up with another indication other than movement disorder and some tremor, because tremor you can do with focus ultrasound. That market is going to die without a new innovation. And and it's not just engineering innovation. I think it's biological innovation. So I'm kind of into what can you do now? And then we can think about what we can do with illnesses once we see there's a win in the psychiatric space.
Okay, we're definitely behind, but I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to give the mic to Maram.
Thank you for that great talk. This is a very general question. As far as the sense that for most patients, they see their psychiatrist, they're going to be offered drugs before they're offered neuromodulation. So I'm thinking about, is there a different standard? And to some extent with drugs, can you get away with being not sophisticated? And with neuromodulation, you have to be sophisticated to succeed?
So, I mean, I think that's a really profound point because you should argue that pharmacology should be sophisticated too. I think it's a sort of a general indictment of how people are trained. People don't in psychiatry learn enough about the brain, don't think about wiring. I think your work, I think the non-invasive world in psychiatry where one sees that treatment model is a valuable way to take care of your patients is forcing people to learn about precision. But I do think that there's a funny double standard that I think is just the evolution of all of this. I think we're at a weird tipping point. I mean, I think we're at the critical period of a shift, and we all look at it from where we are right now and kind of see it through our own lens and see kind of like that just seems irrational to me as you look around. I think feeling like things are irrational when you're in the middle of it means we're morphing. And I think we just hold on because if you want to be effective as a doctor, you're going to need to learn this. Up to now, you haven't needed to learn it. And whether you want it because you see that that's a better kind of practice, whether you see it as a way for psychiatry to earn a living, I mean, however you want to see it, or that it's just to, I mean, again, the world is a market. I mean, just because you're an academic, I don't play that. That's not my world. But that I do think that your work, Jacob's work, the Brain Initiative's work is going to kind of change how the public and doctors will have to do their work to be competitive and to help their patients. So I think we're just watching it.
Okay, well, Helen, thank you very much. We really appreciate your talk.